Hello. Today I'd like to talk about temperance. I prepared some questions for a conversation, and now I'm going to discuss these questions. I've studied the concept of temperance for almost an entire week. I had a couple of meditations, I worked on the questions, I read Aristotle, read an article on Wikipedia, and was thinking about it for probably 10 or even more hours. Now, this is my summary. I not only prepared the questions, but I also made few notes which I'd like to cover in this video. So first of all, let's do the questions. And I guess while answering these questions, I'll also use the information which I put down on the paper. Okay, what kinds of associations the idea of temperance evokes in your mind? So this is a question for the beginning of a conversation. It helps to warm up our brains. And I think that it just doesn't have to have any special answer. I definitely will use some adjectives or nouns or verbs which may be associated with the word temperance, just to put my mind into the right frame. So let's make just 5-10 adjectives for temperance. Good, bad, strong, weak. I think in oppositions. That's fine. It's very hard to come up with something special. I see that I don't, since it's a rare word and I'm trying to make adjectives, like which adjectives could describe this word, there's nothing which I can actually find immediately, since I've never heard people talking about temperance and describing it, and I can't remember anything, so I have to made it up. But I guess better use another approach. So instead of making some adjectives and nouns, I'll simply think about it using like all sorts of associations, that whatever comes to my mind, I'll just verbalize it immediately. So temperance, moderation, self-control, self-restraint, pleasure, pain, consciousness, awareness, self-discipline, regulation, to avoid, to allow, to pursue, to chase, to understand, to know, to be able to. Virtue, other virtues like justice, fortitude, prudence, wisdom. Okay, I think that's enough. So it's just the beginning. Once again, it helps to set up my mind and just introduce the topic, to think about it for a while, to see what kind of ideas come to my mind. And yeah, that's enough. Let's take the second question. So how does temperance relate to pleasure? And I already stated pleasure, and well, let's discuss it. So pleasure, usually I'd like to use Aristotelian framework. So Aristotle talks about temperance in, I guess it was 6th chapter in Nicomachean Ethics, and he discusses it in opposition to profligacy or profligacy. And for Aristotle, there are only 2 types of pleasure, which may make us profligate, meaning not temperate. If we indulge in these pleasures, we have no temperance. And temperance allow us to moderate our desires with regard to these pleasures. And these are the pleasure of taste and the pleasure of touch. And this is about like sexual pleasures and food and drink. So if we access these pleasures, we have no temperance. And temperance essentially allows us to see, to observe the golden mean. So we don't eat too much. We know how much do we need, how much we need, and we fill our bellies with the right amount of food. And the same about all sorts of drinks, and the same about sex. So, and for Aristotle, that's all. There's just two types of pleasure. He doesn't relate temperance to what he calls the pleasures of the soul. So he distinguishes between the pleasures of the body and the pleasures of the soul. And the pleasure of the soul may be learning or satisfying ambition or honor, whatever. And these are from different fields. So these, for example, he uses as an example somebody who likes to gossip a lot. And he says he may excess in gossip, have an excess in gossip, but doesn't mean that he is not temperate, that he is profligate, because it's a different type of pleasure. We would rather call such men, what was the name? I forgot. Bubbler or something like that. Or okay. And only the pleasures which relate to taste and touch for Aristotle may be considered as those which affect our temperance, or which allow us to control our, okay, I see it's hard. It's hard, but once again, I just wanted to explain this idea. I want to understand how to talk about it. So there are two types of pleasures: the pleasures of the soul, the pleasures of the body. Temperance allows us to see, to observe the golden mean in these pleasures. It allows us to get as much as we need, no more. And if we have no temperance, we eat more than necessary, we engage in all sorts of sexual behaviors more than necessary. And it actually weakens us. It makes us less strong. And of course, it destroys ultimately our temperance. So I guess there are many other philosophers like Plato or Stoics or some Christian philosophers who discussed this idea of temperance. And for them, of course, it wasn't just bodily pleasures. In Wikipedia, temperance is described as the moderation or self-restraint. And for self-restraint, they used ideas such as, what was the idea? Self-restraint from revenge. And here you practice non-violence and forgiveness. So this, like, revenge is a certain type of pleasure in this case, which we may use temperance to, not to not to act upon this this thing. So if we want to revenge, again, revenge basically it's an emotion, or it's a certain intention, and it's pleasant, and sometimes it leads to what to, to all sorts of catastrophes. Yeah, but the idea of such things as revenge, for example, non-violence and forgiveness, or restraint from arrogance by practicing modesty and humility, it's not certainly Aristotelian framework. It's a later Christian framework, and those ideas, like, it's clear when we read Aristotle, we see that for Aristotle, this idea that we have to be humble, that we have to, restrain ourselves in many great things which we do, it's actually a foolish idea. Sometimes it may be useful, but in other times, it for Aristotle has, for example, this virtue which he calls high-mindedness, and for him, high-mindedness, it's an ideal state of the wise man. So when a man practices virtues for his entire life, or whatever, like 20, 30 years, and becomes virtuous, for him, like, he may talk about, like, he may say that he achieved this great state of mind, like high-mindedness. And for him, all other people, they're just like animals. So if he talks about himself and describes, what he is doing, it may look for other people as if this person shows off. But for him, it's not actually showing off. It's basically saying the truth, stating the truth. And if he practice humility and modesty, if he will talk about himself saying that he actually does not deserve what he has, or that he is less, or smaller than he actually is, it's also a type of vice for Aristotle, and it's little-mindedness. And again, there are some differences, but the idea, for example, in Christianity, it's kind of clear that this thing, like humility and modesty, is virtues. And for Aristotle, these are not virtues. These, in their essence, these are vices. And that's very interesting to see how different ideas and concepts evolve in different societies, and especially in different groups. Since Aristotle was an aristocrat, and his life was like had slaves, and basically dedicated his entire life to studying philosophy, and he didn't need to do anything, and he was from whatever, from family of scholars. His father was a doctor, and he never had to work, and all this, again, he basically had everything given to him from the very beginning, from the early age. And he belonged to a particular group, and for this group, of course, like, strengthening themselves and becoming better, it was one of the one of the natural things which they did. And for those who are born like slaves, for example, in Christianity, mostly it's we may consider it as a worldview of a particular, of oppressed people, of those who were under oppression, and who had different ideas related to how things should be. And of course, if you are like an aristocrat, and if you achieved a great success in whatever you are doing, whether it's practicing virtues, or writing, or politics, or anything, any type of art, so you, of course, you'd like to talk about yourself as if you've done something great. And if you belong to this class, it's safe to praise yourself, not praising like saying more than you are. For Aristotle, that's very important. So you, like, when you praise yourself, you not praise yourself in vain. This is of course also wise. But if you really achieved something, like Aristotle, for example, he wrote many books, had many students, taught like lots of people to think, and invented lots of maybe discovered some ideas which showed to be very important for the later ages. And of course, for him, modesty basically saying that he was a small guy, he didn't do anything, his writings aren't important, and basically humiliating oneself. For him, it was a type of vice, and he called it little-mindedness. Whereas for those people who actually didn't do anything, of course, it's very strong idea and belief. Like, you haven't achieved anything, and you basically say, yeah, I haven't achieved anything, I haven't done anything. And that's why it was considered virtue among those who were slaves, and vice among those who were masters. And I guess if we look closely at what's going on right now in modern life everywhere, there's the same distinction. So some people practice maybe even unconsciously certain types of virtues, and for some groups these virtues would be vices, and vice versa. For some groups their virtues would be vices for other groups. But yeah, I'm not going to dive into details, but it's an interesting idea. So to see different types of pleasures, and what's really pleasant, and also consider the pleasures of the soul, so-called pleasures of the soul, such as ambition, an urge for studying, for knowledge, for wisdom, and all sorts of others. Okay, let's do the next question. Okay, what can we do to practice temperance? So what can we do to practice temperance? Also all sorts of restraints, starting from very little. Like right now, I may practice temperance by focusing my attention on the way how I speak. Whenever I want to use a filler, something like or a or I have to be aware that I'm using it. In self-restraint, I impose a certain rule on my speech. And whenever I speak, if I break this rule, I have to pay attention. And next time I have to learn to avoid breaking this rule. And there may be many rules. Like for me right now, it's certainly avoiding fillers, staying consistent, not getting too much aside, learning how to express my emotions clearly, my ideas, to develop these ideas, using as less words as possible, even though it's almost impossible, but still I'm trying to be precise. I'm trying to be clear. I'm trying to stay at the particular way of, developing my thoughts, and I'm trying to be consistent. So there's this idea of temperance. I have questions, and I'm trying to talk about these questions and not get too much aside. So now, once again, the question is how we can practice temperance. So imposing certain rules on our types of behavior. It may be pleasant to be a sort of vague and less clear, whatever. When I have a conversation, when I have a talk, or when I have a self-dialogue, self-talk, it may be very fun to allow all sorts of emotions to come to the present, and just talk about whatever comes to my mind. I really like this. I have other exercises when I do exactly that. Simply allow myself to express my feelings through language, where it's not necessary to be consistent. It's not necessary to talk about anything in particular. But this is a different type of self-talk. So here I'm trying to answer certain questions, and rules may be different. Once again, just one way of practicing temperance, focusing on one's thinking and on one's speech. So since for me it's the same, like speaking and thinking for me right now are the same, I'm thinking aloud. I haven't prepared this beforehand. I prepared on the questions, and the way how I answer them is my natural way of thinking aloud. So I want to control my thoughts. I want them to flow natural way, but at the same time, I want to use certain words and phrases, and I want to avoid using others words and fillers and phrases and all sorts of things. Also, it may be all kind of restrained on different types of behaviors, like food. Once again, instead of eating more than necessary, one may try to eat a little bit less than necessary and reduce the amount of food he eats gradually, just starting small. Instead of eating 2 sandwiches, eating just one, and then just half. No, not today, tomorrow, but no, this month, I'm trying to avoid eating particular type of food, or eat it twice as less as I usually eat it. And then gradually transforming your diet and learning how to control your appetite. The same may be referred to sex. And here, well, I think it depends on age, of course. So if somebody came to me and said that you have to have sex only once a week, like when I was 20, I would probably laugh and say, wow, it's crazy. But when you're 30 or 35, that's okay, once a week or once a month, or sometimes you may not have sex for half a year or 5 years, for example. Why not? It's also possible. So all depends on what kind of goals are you pursuing and what you really want to achieve. But if you want to practice your temperance, so uh, you may imagine it as a kind of entity. It may be a part of you or a part of your brain, some neural network in your brain, some neural cluster. When it fires, you can control all your desires. And it helps you to organize your behavior. It helps you to control your emotions, to master your emotions in a certain way. So whenever you feel, and there's always temperance, I guess it's not from Aristotle, but from modern psychology. So temperance is an excess of an emotion. So when there's anger, of course, the right amount of anger is useful, and we may, if we know how to apply it properly, if we are not controlled by anger, but if we can control our anger, it may gives us like so much extra energy to perform certain actions. Like I would like to have a little bit anger here when I record these videos. I know that when I feel anger, it makes my voice different. It makes my entire thinking. It transforms my entire thinking. But when there's enough anger, I may speak much better, and I feel much better when I perform certain when I talk with anger. But when there's too much anger, it immediately creates something that I want to avoid, something unpleasant. And all other emotions, which not necessarily negative, for example, love, too much love, I guess it's never it's never useful. It's never actually, like I would say that too much love ruins relationships more than the lack of love. So if you have more love than necessary, and if you don't know how to express it, it makes things much more terrible. It's the same as passion for a wrong thing, like for video games. I love playing video games, but there's too much love, and when I start playing video games, I can't stop. That's why I shouldn't. That's why I restrain myself from playing video games completely, since it's still uncontrollable in my experience. So all sorts of emotions. So basically observing emotions, all emotions, not just anger and love, like fear, hate, disgust, regret, sadness, everything. Observing when it's too much, like learning to control it. And by learning to control it, I don't mean suppressing the emotion. I mean discovering the opposite emotion and developing that. So if you, for example, are afraid of something, and I tell you that you shouldn't be afraid of doing that, it doesn't actually help. But if I tell you take courage, like develop your courage, do something that helps you be stronger and fearless, this is a different advice, and it actually helps. So instead of saying don't do something else, do something opposite, which helps you to control your emotions. So whenever there is an excess of something, the best way of moderating this excess is developing the opposite whatever, the opposite emotion. Anyway, so this was the question, how can we practice temperance? And by the way, there are many different, just a certain mindset. So you may always ask yourself this question at the beginning of every day. How can I improve my temperance today? What can I do? And then there will be lots of ideas which will come to your mind, and then you just implement your temperance and those ideas. So it may be everything, literally. And at the end of the day, you may also ask, like, what was the opportunity for practicing temperance today? And you'll also see that there were many opportunities for you, if not in interaction with other people, but in thoughts, in your stream of consciousness. There are 16 hours every day. You have certain ideas thrown through your consciousness, and throwing through going through your consciousness for 16 hours. And if you learn to moderate them, if you learn to use your language, most of these ideas is certain types of intention, and intentions are based on emotions. So if you discover what kind of emotions you have to moderate, and if you discover what actually makes you excess, to go to the extreme in these emotions, you will be able to control them much more easy. So first is not to control something, but to understand yourself, to learn your emotions, to learn what makes you feel what, and then studying it and observing the golden mean and analyzing how to work with all of that. So it's very practical. I mean, this idea of temperance, every day asking oneself, how can I improve my temperance? 2 times a day, like at the beginning of the day, at the end of the day. What could I do today to improve my temperance? And then what can I do today to improve my temperance? Why was it so important for ancient philosophers to have temperance? Well, this is the question which I haven't thought about at all. Just came to my mind. I decided that it would be interesting to ask. Well, let's just try to figure out, why was it so important for ancient philosophers, and it's relatively unimportant now? Life was different. So now people are concerned with money, and it seems that not everywhere, but mostly around the globe, in developed countries, like the idea of becoming a virtuous person or developing some traits of your character, it's almost, I wouldn't say it's a dead idea. Obviously, there are many people who study philosophy and practice all sorts of virtues, but it seems that it's relatively unimportant, like on a broad level, like from media, from from schools, and from all sorts of interactions with people. We see, and yeah, I'm biased here, obviously, but in my environment, when I was raised up, like, people didn't talk about temperance. They didn't talk about philosophy. They didn't talk about virtue. most of the talks which I heard was about money, about relationships, about job, about games, and about food, but not in terms of how to control, your temper, how to develop temperance and control your food, but in terms, what's tasty, what's not tasty, what we should eat, what we shouldn't eat, what we like, what we don't like. And that's so silly. But anyway, so for me, I'm prejudiced, but I would not generalize and say that it's everywhere. But it looks as if there were lots of there's a big difference between the life which we had 2000 years ago and the life we have right now. There's different preferences. So many people strive for things which they don't need and which probably they strive not because their inner desire for these things, but because of all sorts of advertising. So as soon as we invented radio and then TV and then the internet, now we have all sorts of unnecessary desires and wishes. And most of them they're not irrational. So we accidentally watch some, advertisement, we hear something on radio or in some songs, or we just go in the street and there's some advertisements, and we just unnaturally, we are programmed by our environment to have all sorts of desires which aren't necessary. And these desires, of course, they make us feel unsatisfied, and they create this craving for things which make us miserable, because we like, these things, most of them are empty in themselves, so they don't give us anything. But it's very hard to know unless you actually have the thing. So imagine that you want to have an expensive car, like some whatever, which costs, let's say, which costs $100,000. So you want to buy the car. You think that if you have a car, everybody will like you, and you'll feel so important driving this car, and girls will like you, and whatever. You may have all sorts of wishes and beliefs and superstitions associated with this idea of having a car. And mostly you have it because your environment shows you that everybody who has this car, they are happy. And you follow, you try to buy a car. And again, you may spend like 10, 15 years working and trying to get the car. And then finally you get it, you buy it, and you see that it doesn't make you happy at all. It probably brings much more whatever, negative stuff with it. Of course, at the beginning, for first few weeks, you'll feel happy, but then you say, come on, I was working for 10 years to buy this shit. And now, like, what am I doing? So now things which are presented to us by our environment, they're on the surface, they look good and we want to have them. But as soon as we have them, they make very little, like they bring us very little satisfaction and happiness. But still, since since we are programmed to live in such, in such environment and to follow, this free market stuff, all this capitalism. So as soon as we are programmed in this particular way, we prefer to get things which look good on the surface, but those things like virtues, right? So temperance, for example, temperance, again, that it's an idea, but this is also this idea. It refers to something in our personality, in our character, and we may build this something if we invest enough time and attention to do that. So it takes much more time and effort. It takes years and probably decades to perfect your temperance. But the truth is that if you discover this idea in your early age, when you are 10 or 15 or even 20, and if you worked on it for 10 years, perfecting your temperance, in 10 years, you will need nothing and you'll feel so powerful. And your life is going to be much more interesting and exciting than the life of somebody who spent 10 years trying to buy an expensive car, believing that this will bring him or her happiness. So temperance definitely, like, why am I use the word happiness? Because you essentially learn to control your emotions. And when you are able to control your emotions, nothing can disturb you. Like literally, of course, there are some things, like terrible things may happen and you may feel sad, but still, even if you have this emotion, it doesn't mean that you are unhappy. You understand that some event may bring you certain emotion, but you do not succumb to this emotion. You learn to understand it and control it in some sense. So even if you feel sad, sadness doesn't overcome you. You still become, you are kind of, you conquer your emotion. And then, like on an abstract level, you may always, not run away from sadness, but you may always say, oh, that's okay. This is what I have to feel. This is a feeling which is appropriate to this situation, but I'm not gonna do some stupid things under the influence of this feeling. It may be, again, maybe sadness, maybe anger, maybe all sorts of, fear. So you feel fear, but you do not run away. And that's temperance. And when you know how to control your emotions, when you see how it works, when you develop your, virtues, it's much like, you can't even imagine how, like, if you do not do that, if all your life you were chasing money and girls and friends, and if you tried to, buy stuff and, get wealthy, it's it's what I'm talking about here. It's from a different era, but this is practical. Since I remember myself when I was 20, again, I was in the same situation. I was brainwashed by my culture, by my environment, and I was thinking that all I need is to have a beautiful girlfriend or wife, for that matter, to have a good job, to have a good car, to have a good house, to have lots of things, many friends, and have fun. And when I discovered like philosophy at the first time, and for me, 2007, when I read Castaneda, I started like this. Don Juan is basically a manifestation of all sorts of virtues. And when I discovered that you may actually work on yourself instead of working for others and improve yourself so that you are able to live being not affected by external things and working on your character and developing it, and it's endless. It was such a great idea. But anyway, so why it was so important for ancient philosophers? Once again, like different values, different attitudes toward life. So now we have certain values, and temperance actually, like, whether we have, well, it's very powerful, but still it's very hard to say. Like, people do not understand what it is. And now there's so much. Now, I guess temperance, it's in essence, it's a religious idea. So it's more. So it's not scientific. There's no such thing which we can call temperance. So it's not inside of us. It's not outside. It's just an idea. But this idea, it's powerful, since if we, let's say, worship this idea at some level, it changes our perception. It changes our personalities, changes our characters. And then we're able to live in the world differently from if we do not have this, manifestation of temperance in us. But this is, again, it's a kind of religious idea. Now, all religions, most of them, again, are not so popular, and it's very hard, to teach temperance, for example. It's it's almost impossible. You want to teach psychology, but temperance for ancient philosophers, it was very important, since as soon as you have temperance, you become invincible. So if you may moderate your desires, you actually learn to live, for Aristotle, he called like kind of noble life. So all your actions, everything you do is right. You don't need to blame yourself. Therefore, you don't have to feel all sorts of regrets and guilts and shames and all these things for actions which you do being forced by your emotions, by your desires. In this case, you may do nothing, but you still will feel much better than somebody who does lots of things, but in the end comes to, depression or all sorts of disappointments. Again, just my opinion, and what I'm doing again is brainstorming. So whatever I say, it may be true, it may be false. I'm not claiming that this is right, this is wrong, this is how you should live, this is what you have to prefer. Like temperance is much better than money. To learn to develop your temperance instead of earning money. Temperance is something that you can invest your energy in, and it will be forever with you. Whereas money, whatever, tomorrow there will be another crisis. Money will cost nothing. Will worth nothing, and temperance will always worth something. So this, like, think about it as an investment in yourself, like building. So imagine that you are the state, like the entire state, the population, humanity, whatever. And you think, I want to be strong. So if you are a state, if you want to be strong, what are you doing? You build an army. Imagine that temperance is your inner army. So you build an inner army, which whenever, or maybe police, but yeah, I would prefer the word army, since police is inner police or inner army. So whenever there's some riot inside of you, you use this police to suppress this riot. Yeah, but the point is, of course, so you have to understand that, yeah, this idea of playing these games. So imagine that you're like your state, and you can develop some social institutions inside of yourself and enhance these institutions simply by thinking and intending to do that. It's extremely powerful. So it may change your entire way of perceiving the world, but it's also dangerous. So if you're a young kid, if you're like 10 years old or 15 years old, and you discover that there's some such ideas like virtue and temperance, and if you become really serious about it, that's what's important here to understand. You have to be serious about it. You have to be much more serious about developing your temperance than you are serious about earning money or going to school or pursuing some career path or chasing women. So the point is that if you develop your temperance, if you are serious about it, if you think about it every day for enough time, it'll grow, and it'll help you to overcome all sorts of stupid habits, all sorts of stupid desires. Not just some of the desires. Of course, I'm not saying that every desire is stupid, but there are virtuous virtuous desires, right? But yeah, I don't know what it is. Personally, for me, I think studying philosophy is virtuous. I think developing your strength is virtuous. I think developing your intelligence is virtuous. I think developing certain skills like writing, speaking, listening, reading, all these types of activities are virtuous. Meditation, doing working on your body, developing your body, paying attention to what you're doing, to what you're saying, to what you're eating, to what kind of information you allow to get in, to whom you talk to, like what's your environment, who are those people who who have impact on you. All these things are important. Temperance, it's kind of guide. It helps you to get things which makes you stronger, smarter, greater, and it stops you when you want to do something stupid, which finally will weaken your character and make you, dumber. But anyway, let's go on. Like for Asian philosopher, this is a nice question. Actually, I see that I might talk about it for quite a long time. What does temperance have to do with freedom? So obviously there may be different opinions on that, and I would say that for me personally, temperance, it's key to freedom, one of the keys as other virtues. So if you have temperance, you are free. You may essentially get rid of all sorts of unnecessary things, and then you may have more free time to dedicate it to something that you really love, something that you really want to do. Your art, your philosophy, your, anything, anything that you are working on, your intelligence, your strength. There's so many destructive things. And temperance, as soon as you know how much you need of some things, of food, of sex, of interactions with people, of meaningless, whatever, meaningless activities. So as soon as you know, there's much more time for you to focus on something that you really are doing, something that, like, with what you identify yourself. So you may have an identity that you are a person, a body, right? Somebody who was born and who, got through all this social, social, whatever. What is it? Okay, through school, through work, through family, through all these social interactions. But you may also have an identity that you're a particular, for example, you may even have an identity that you are temperance. So if I am a manifestation of temperance, and what am I doing here? Like, what should I do? How should I interact with the external world? Is there any external world at all? All these questions. But also you may have identities like I'm a philosopher, for example. For me, what I'm doing, I'm studying philosophy. What is philosophy? It's love of wisdom. So when I'm pursuing wisdom, I'm trying to figure out what is wise, and I'm trying to learn to do better what I'm doing, and while like pursuing wisdom. So I learn to develop my skills. I learn to write. I learn to think. I learn to use different languages. I learn to understand other people. I learn different sciences. And for me, all this is important, and there are unimportant things. So, for example, I may go and waste my time just watching movies, or watching some stupid things on the internet, or communicating with people who are, who are who do not understand what I'm doing, and who do not care about what I'm doing, who are focused on their own lives, and who are who are living in their own filter bubbles, and for whom no interaction actually, for with whom no interaction makes any sense for me. So, but still, I may, like, it may be enjoyable, and I may spend my time trying to do something that or doing something that doesn't bring me anything, doesn't improve my, me as a philosopher, or me as a writer, or me as a thinker, or me as a poet, or me as a linguist or a scientist. So in this case, of course, I'm doing it because I enjoy it, and I enjoy it because it gives me certain pleasure, and probably it's unnecessary pleasure, and to get rid of this pleasure, temperance is the key. So you learn, and again, I have a lot of pleasure from just recording videos like that. And now I have enough energy to like record one video a day, or sometimes few videos a day. And that's wonderful. I can do it for the rest of my life. I don't need anything else to get pleasure. Of course, I may do all sorts of other activities, but they're not because I want to get pleasure from them, but because I think it makes sense, and it helps me to develop myself as this like philosophical character, as a philosopher. So different intentions. Instead of pursuing pleasure, pursuing something meaningful, something that changes, transforms one's personality, one's understanding, one's life. Okay, so once again, freedom. So temperance is the key to freedom. And it's personal freedom. Yeah, I would say like we may be slaves of our emotions, or we may be masters of our emotions and desires. So temperance makes us masters of our desires, or it makes certain desire in us achieve mastery over other desires. And when we know which kind of desires are beneficial for us, and when we know how to make these desires rise to power in our inner government or inner whatever city, we achieve certain, success. When we use the word success, like personal freedom. So free, like we're free, not just one, but probably several desires from servitude to other desires. And we allow these desires to flourish. And other desires, we do not repress them, we simply use them to support those desires. So we create like inner hierarchy of motives, of behaviors. And instead of doing badly at all types of behaviors, we do our best at 3, 4, 5 types of behaviors, and we disregard all the others or use all the others to make free just these 5. But then we identify with these 5, and we basically become, the manifestation of these 5 or no 5, 3, 4 types of behaviors or intentions. What makes us believe that temperance is a virtue? So this profound idea, and I'd like to read here one of the passage which I wrote I took it from Nietzsche's book. I guess it was Genealogy of Morality. And well, first let me read the passage, and then I comment on it. So self-overcoming is demanded not on account of the useful consequences it may have for the individual, but so that the hegemony of custom, tradition, shall be made evident in despite of the private desires and advantages of the individual. The individual is to sacrifice himself. That is the commandment of morality of custom. These moralists, on the other hand, who, following the footsteps of Socrates, offer the individual a morality of self-control and temperance as a means to his own advantage, as his personal key to happiness, are the exceptions. And if it seems otherwise to us, that is because we have been brought up in their after effect. They all take a new path under the highest disapprobation of all advocates of morality of custom. They cut themselves off from the community, and the mortal man, and are in the profoundest sense evil. Okay, so the idea is that different types of different cultures. In different cultures, there are different social classes. And in us, language, when we use language, so there are 2 conflicting motivations. So one is to preserve ourselves as individuals and to expand our personalities, to expand ourselves, our knowledge, our language, whatever, our intentions in the world. And the other type of intentionality is to improve the community. So like it's an eternal conflict between individual and the community. I'm not saying that always these intentions are conflicting, but sometimes you have to choose whether you do something for yourself to make yourself stronger, wiser, smarter, better, or you have to do something for the community to make the community stronger, smarter, better, more powerful, whatever. And if you do something for the community, it may weaken your personality. If you do something for yourself, it may weaken the strength of the community. And certain beliefs and virtues developed on both sides. So on one side, you may say humility and modesty is the virtue. And as an individual, for example, oftentimes it's not the virtue at all. So if you want to become stronger, if you want to grow, expand, if you want to get more power, but not in terms of power over others, but power over oneself, power over your desires, power over, of course, you may have power over others in terms of being able to get rid of them, to not allow them to manipulate you. And this is also a very important, type of power. And if you have this power, you basically may focus on whatever you are doing. For example, I'm studying language. I don't want to participate in anything unrelated to language and philosophy. And I am powerful enough to, to create a wall around myself, a metaphysical wall, and not allow anybody to, cross this wall. And that's what I'm doing when I'm studying language. So I have this power, and I basically enhance my, my knowledge, my wisdom, my linguistic power. If I want to do something for the state, and here the idea of that I'm doing well, that I'm smart, that I'm wise, that I do like whatever I'm doing is right, and I've done so many great things already, and I'm going to do much more in the future probably. So this idea, like when I tell it to myself all the time, when I'm trying to convince myself that I'm a great person, I'm like whatever, I'm doing the great things. This helps me to become great, even if I start from being like a fucking idiot. If I do the opposite, if I'm humble all the time, if I say, I'm actually a small little individual, there's so many other great people and I can't be like them, I can't allow myself to be like them. So in the first case, like your virtue, your temperance is focused on your strength. In the second case, it may be focused on the society's strength. And in the second case, it may weaken you. In the first case, it may weaken society sometimes not. But again, there are some conflicting motives. So, and the idea that temperance is a virtue, so it depends again how you apply it. So if you apply it to develop certain intentions in you or certain characteristics, features of your personality, it may be virtue for you, but it may be vice for society. And on the other side, it may be like what you call temperance may serve to weaken you as an individual, but improve the society. And you may believe that this is temperance. Again, so it's very uncertain. So everybody, I guess, has to decide for themselves whether or not temperance is a virtue, and what kind of virtue, and when it's virtue, and in relation to whom, etc. Yeah, okay. So why do we believe that it's a virtue? It helps. Like, what is virtue? It's basically virtue is a trait of character, which what is the working definition of virtue? Come on, it's a trait of our character, which is good in itself, yeah, which is noble, which is it's something in us that makes us better people. Well, again, what does mean better? Yeah, I had this conversation on virtue just 2 weeks ago, and I already forgot the definition of it. I'd like to check it out, but not now, later. Anyway, so virtue, what makes us think it's virtue? Yeah. Well, I'm not going to repeat it, but essentially I see the idea here. So we may discuss again different types of virtues. And since temperance helps us to improve ourselves, to get enough what we need, and to get rid of everything we don't need, it may be virtue since it helps us to make us better, make us stronger, make us smarter, wiser. So how is the concept of temperance represented across different social classes? So, and this is an idea which I've already discussed. So there's like social classes, like now we have, let's say, capitalists and proletariat. But yeah, we have different. So we have a middle class. We have all sorts of how are they called? Like those people who basically serve in some social institutions. I guess I have to check out the theory of different, different social classes. Now I see that I have no sufficient vocabulary to talk about. But again, people who are like philosophers, like scientists, it's one class. And I guess it's in ancient times they were priests, and now they're philosophers and scientists. Then we have warriors and this police, army, and people who are who are used by the government to for a variety of purposes. So again, scholars or priests, scientists, warriors, policemen, and those who like used as a power, governors, who are now, again, it's very hard to determine who are those governors. Are they, and I'm not talking about one particular country, but about the world. So are they the richest people or the smartest people or the strongest people? It's still questionable. And of course, we have a social class, like the the unwashed masses who basically do not belong to any class, and they are kind of totally confused about what's going on and what they're doing. But yeah, I'm not saying it with contempt. I'm basically trying to say that there's just people who work in factories, in schools, in everywhere. So those who not, I guess, warriors, and not all of them, of course, but and we have in every class we have elite, and we have masses, and the elite is usually free, so it dictates what's going to happen, and it doesn't need to work for somebody else. And we have masses who must follow a course of action prescribed by somebody else, and this is what distinguishes like the elite, one class from the other. But there are different classes, so it's not just there's an elite in philosophy, for example, or in science, that those who actually do whatever they are doing on their own will. So they decide, I'm going to study philosophy, and I'm going to do it on myself. I'm going to pay attention, of course, to like modern philosophers, but I'm not going to subscribe to any job or any ideology and promote this ideology, whether it's academia or whether it's a particular ideology. No, I'm going to do whatever I'm doing. And this makes me free. So there's no boss. I am free. And yeah, I guess there's, of course, those who work for somebody else. And it's like school in scholars, it's one case. In army, there are commanders and those whom they command. But essentially in army, there's just one person or small, tiny group of people who are in command, and like all the rest have to obey the orders. And here we have like 99.9% slaves and just 0.1% of masters. In schools, in academia and science, we have probably like 80-20 or something like that, or maybe 50-50, or I don't know, maybe everybody's independent. No, everybody's independent. Of course, it's some kind of utopia, but yeah, it makes sense that it'll probably happen in the future. But still, now we have lots of researchers and laboratories and institutions where people consider their activity as work. So if you go to the institution or a laboratory, and if you are paid by somebody else, it's like you probably have a boss and he dictates you what you have to do. In this case, you belong to not to the elite, but the masses. And again, in government also, there's, I guess, the same structure as in the army, and all sorts of and again, what's virtue? Again, what's virtuous for masters is not the same as what's virtuous for slaves. And yeah, and temperance, therefore, must be applied to developing certain, to moderate in certain desires and wishes and emotions. And some of these emotions are more important than others for different types of social classes. So anger, for example, it's very, like, you don't need to moderate your anger if you are in command in the army. So the more angry you are, the better. But you probably need to moderate your desire to eat as much as, as you want. Otherwise, you'll just, perhaps your those who obey your commands will not obey them if you will be too fat. And obviously anger, whatever may be associated with anger, it's not something that a servant must practice or become virtuous of, to apply his or her temperance. Since if you develop anger and if you're a slave, probably it will not lead you. Well, it may make you a master at some moment, but at the if you do it smartly. But if you are not aware of what you're doing, probably will lead you to to what? It'll bring you bring troubles to your life more than it'll make you free. But anyway, okay, yeah, I think I have to finish already. I'm talking for an hour, and in half an hour I have to get out and go to the club. There are a few more questions, like how does temperance help us to develop other virtues? And I've already mentioned it. I'm not going to discuss it now. So what are the principles upon which temperance might be built? This is an interesting question. I'm going to think about it on the way to the club. So I have half an hour. I'm going to walk and think about some principles. So it may be, do not follow your passion. This is definitely, yeah, I remember a year ago, I recorded the video where I was talking about follow your passion, find your passion, whatever it is, and follow it. So if you want to develop your temperance, you have to control your passion. And if you follow your passion, you can control it, since you may make it very, very strong. So follow your passion, do not follow your passion. But do not, it's a bad principle. So it's negative. So what is the positive principle? Pay attention to your emotions. Yeah, this may be a good principle. So if you pay attention to your emotions, you may develop temperance. You may acquire temperance. Every time when you notice that you do something in excess, you make a note. Next time when there's the same situation, and you of course, you make not just a note, I was angry and I said something because of my anger. I shouldn't do that next time. No, what was the situation? So I was angry when I talked to my girlfriend, when she asked me to do something. Okay, next situation when we talk about this, I may become angry. So I have to be careful. So you pay attention, you write down what you're doing. Next time you already prepared for the same situation, and then if you are prepared, it's basically it's 80% of success in acquiring temperance. If you know that the situation is hard and you may become angry, or you may become afraid, or you may indulge in any other emotion. So if you know that it may happen, you're already prepared, and next time when it happens, you notice it at the moment when it happens, and that's it. Actually, that's it. So to acquire temperance, you just need to notice that you are angry at the moment when you are angry, and then you don't need to control it. You basically, oh, I'm angry. Funny how it works. Let's see. Yeah. So control in this case means basically an ability to be aware of your doing, since anger may control you and may make you say bad things and do bad things when you are not aware of it. The same pleasure for food, for example. So if you have a desire to eat cookie, if you are aware that this is a desire and that this is a desire which actually leads you to troubles, to something somewhere where you don't want to be, may make you weaker, or it may bring pleasure, but it's short-term pleasure, but on a long-term run, it'll bring much more suffering. So you know that, you are aware, and then you ask, like, do I really need to eat it to suffer then? That may help. Okay, principles. I said I'll think about it, and probably I'll come up with 5-10 principles which may be used to to control our temperance, to acquire temperance, to build temperance. So what destroys our temperance? Ignorance. I guess ignorance is one of the answers. So lack of knowledge. Lack of knowledge of what we're doing and why we're doing that. And unwillingness to pay attention. Obsession, passion also destroys our temperance as well. What else? I don't know. I'll think about it too. So destroy, or I just ask people to think about it, since I already have thinking about these questions for more than an hour uninterruptedly. Which books provide mental food for nourishing temperance? Yeah, I like the way how I formulated this question. Once again, which books provide mental food for nourishing temperance? Well, I would recommend Aristotelian Nicomachean Ethics. It's definitely a powerful book. It's hard to read. It's not like as exciting as modern articles and whatever. It's dull, boring book, but it requires thinking. So if one reads this book and thinks about it and does it slowly, obviously it's a very rich book. So in terms of just reading for fun, for entertainment, for whatever other reason, it will not probably bring good results. But reading the book to understand certain ideas and learn from these ideas, it's like reading grammar book. So it's almost the same. So you read the grammar book, it's very powerful, but it's very boring, and usually you get so much material which you cannot apply. That's why there are different ways of how you can read grammar books. You may read it one short article once a week and think about it for the next week and try to apply it in your, in your thinking, in your writing, in your speech. And you just do it. You're doing it for 5-10 years. Just one article, like one simple sentence. So you read about simple sentence, you understand what it is, and you practice it for a week or maybe for a month until you can not just understand it, but until you can confidently use it. And then you go and read another article about compound sentences, and you try to apply them as well. And the same, like next month or week, you take an article on complex sentences. You make examples, you try to analyze your own thinking and your own conversations using like these certain rules. It's the same with Aristotle. So when you read him at once and fast and do not apply anything, it's boring, it's tiresome, and it doesn't bring anything useful, probably. Well, sometimes, of course, it may be interesting just to focus your attention on particular ideas, not practicing anything, but if you are able to, grammar books may be interesting if you invest something from yourself. So you may read an entire grammar book at once, not to learn anything, but just to see the structure of the language and get familiarized with certain concepts. The same with Aristotle. So like reading one chapter or probably a paragraph a week, analyzing what's written here, thinking about it, applying it for your life, maybe very, very beneficial in terms of gaining temperance and all other virtues. What kind of other books I would recommend? Well, Temperance, so self-control. Kant is useful here. So the critique of practical reason, probably the critique of pure reason as well, just to to learn to read boring stuff for a long period of time. Categorical imperative, his idea of categorical imperative, it's very powerful when you like Kant was a moralist, obviously, but most of his writings, they're again boring and dull, but it makes sense to read them just to learn something, to learn about temperance. So if you understand Kantian categorical imperative, and if you like read Kant for 100 hours or 500 hours, you'll just learn. You essentially will be able to read everything after Kant. If you want to improve your reading skill, reading Kant is essential. What categorical imperative is a powerful idea in Kant. I would definitely recommend to read it if one wants to improve his temperance. What else? I don't know. Temperance, self-control. Yeah, I don't know, but I'll think about it later. So I guess this is enough for today. See you at the club.